I should probably have tested to make sure that the microphone works. All right, I'm now testing. This is going to be the greatest start to a recording ever. Hello, hello? Okay, good. Also, is there anything more unpleasant in this world than hearing your own voice recorded? Yeah. It's like literally the worst thing ever. All right, so what we're talking about today is freedom of speech. What is freedom of speech? I want to start off with just a definition, then talk about why we give a damn about it, and then talk about how it's a more complicated thing than we typically think. And really what this is going to be is taking all those types of ethical theories we talked about before and applying them to a particular issue. So what is freedom of speech? First off, how many people have heard of it? Raise them up. All right, good. What is it?
Basically, like,
Right to say whatever we want. So this is a great starting point for our understanding of what freedom of speech is. But this definition doesn't fully capture it. Davion. Yeah, so it's tied in say what we want, but specifically say what our opinions are. And that's an important thing because it's not fully whatever we want. There are limits. Cameron and then Peg. Yeah, so there are limits to it. So we have a right to say what our opinions are / whatever we want. But there's usually some limits on it. We'll talk in a minute about what those limits are. Peg. Now, here's the other key. The right to say whatever we want, and there's a background here. It's without punishment. So there's a sense in which even with freedom of speech, or even without freedom of speech, you're allowed to say whatever you want. Like you are in some sense allowed to go, if you were to get in a time machine and go back to England in the year 1000, you'd be able to say the king sucks and deserves to die. You have the ability to say that, but what would happen to you? Yeah, you're getting your head chopped off if you're lucky. So this is the key. It's without punishment, and specifically without punishment from who? Government. Yeah, without punishment from government. And this is really the key idea, because freedom of speech does not protect you. It is a right. What do we mean by a right? Well, it's something that you have that you are allowed to act upon, and somebody isn't going to be able to punish you for that thing. So like the right to bear arms is the ability to carry around guns without somebody taking them away or putting you in jail. So the right, freedom of speech is the right to say your opinions or whatever you want, basically, without punishment from the government. But there can still be punishment. So who, in what context can you still be punished for what you say, even in a country with freedom of speech? Who can punish you? The government cannot, but others can. So yeah, your friends can punish you. And how do they punish you? They can't put you in jail, but what can they still do? Not talk to you. Yeah, there can still be social punishment. So in the United States, if I run around screaming a racial slur, I cannot get put in jail for it, but I can be shunned and told, we're never going to be your friend again. Go away. We don't want to talk to you. Who else can punish you in certain contexts? So for instance, if I were to, yeah, your company. So private companies can punish employees if it's within the context of the private company, or if they have a clause within their terms of, or within their like handbook of you cannot cause ill, what's the word I'm looking for? If your actions reflect badly on the company, you can be punished even if you, technically speaking, are not doing something that's illegal and the government would not punish you. So this is how sports teams and companies punish people who do and say dumb things online. You cannot put them in jail, but you can fine them and you can suspend them and you can possibly fire them. And so, what? Yes, so, and this is an important thing, your freedom of speech only protects you from the government. It does not protect you from private companies. So if you were to run around Baruch screaming racial slurs, and one of the security guards pulls you aside and is like, you can't do that, we're reporting you to the dean, and the dean is like, all right, you're getting expelled, you've been running around yelling racial slurs. You can't say, this is America, I have freedom of speech, because they'll say, that's right, but this is also CUNY, and you are violating CUNY terms of service. And at CUNY, you are not allowed to do that and remain a student. Therefore, you're kicked out. We're not going to send you to jail, but good luck in your future endeavors because you can't stay here. So that's a key thing with freedom of speech. It only applies to government. It's your right not to be punished by the government, not your right to not be punished by anybody. Bless you. Any questions on that? Any other things that can punish you or that you could be punished for with freedom of speech? So you've got peers and friends, you've got companies you work for. Any sort of like organization you're a part of is going to have some sort of rules. Parents are still allowed to punish their kids. This is why when you talk back to your parents and you then claim I have freedom of speech, they still ground you. It's a so religion. This is actually, I'm so glad you brought this up because there are there's something I forgot to bring up, which is here's another key with freedom of speech. It's called freedom of speech, but it doesn't just apply to speech. What else does the freedom of speech give you? Because it's really freedom of speech, and then there's a bunch of things in parentheses.
Or is it?
So that's a slightly different part of the U.S. or of the U.S. documents that people wrote. One was written by, I think they may have both been, I can't remember who actually wrote out the Constitution. Thomas Jefferson was Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit of Happiness. This freedom of speech is slightly different part of our government documentation. But what other things are you given freedom to do? The government cannot punish you for saying things with your voice, but what else can they not punish you for? Writing. So speech, writing. Hang, what were you gonna say? Yeah, any sort of expression. So if you go around, if you do a play that imitates you as Donald Trump getting your head chopped off, you cannot get punished for that as long as it's within the work of art. Also, freedom of religion is often grouped under this. So if you say religious beliefs, even if they're minority views, you are not able to get punished for that. And however, on the flip side, if you say things that go against what a religion holds, the religious institution can punish you for it. So if you join a cult and the cult leader says, I've been talking to aliens, and you step up and say, you haven't been talking to aliens, you're lying, they can kick you out of the cult. Like, that is perfectly allowed. But the government cannot punish you for saying, I've been speaking to aliens, I'm starting a cult. Hey, everyone else follow me. We're going to pretend we're going to tell ourselves the world is ending and we're all going to join some weird polyamorous cult thing. And everyone's going to have a jolly good time until the world doesn't end, and then we'll all get scared. That's perfectly allowed. The government can't punish you for it. Also, so yeah, for any sort of freedom of expression in art, freedom to organize and walk around with signs that say whatever it is you want to say on your sign, eat the rich. All of that falls under freedom of speech. So it's a right to organize and express yourself in a religious sense or a political sense or anything like that. And it's without punishment from a government organization. That's really the key idea. All right, let me get rid of this board. Now, here's the thing about freedom of speech. It exists on a continuum. Every society has a certain amount of freedom of speech, and how much a society has differs from country to country, time to time. So we can imagine at the extremes, we have your freedom of speech, or I guess complete. What would a society look like if it had complete freedom of speech? The government could not punish you for saying anything. No country in the actual world has ever reached this stage.
Because it was Maybe anarchy?
Yeah, you'd be allowed to say whatever you wanted without punishment. This meant lying in court. This meant making up things. It meant making all the threats you could want. On the other side, you have no freedom of speech. This would be a society in which if you speak, you get your head chopped off. Like no speaking allowed. It would have to be something like the alien overlords have taken over and decided the only way to keep humanity down is to keep us silent. Therefore, anyone who speaks gets killed. Now, no society in human history has ever fallen at either extreme. Rather, everyone falls somewhere in the middle, but where a country falls in the middle differs from country to country, society to society, group to group. So I'm going to put the United States right about here. We are closer to the complete freedom of speech than the no freedom of speech side. What is it that keeps the United States from being in the complete freedom of speech? Now, you both, Peng and Cameron, brought up that there are limitations. So what can you not do, Cameron?
Since I'm pretty sure the government is able to like stretch.
And so what are the sorts of things, though, that they stretch it to include? Because there are certain things that every politician and every group agrees in the United States you cannot say. And you can be punished by the government for saying these particular things, even though we have freedom of speech, yeah? Yeah, so what's generally called harm speech. So harm speech is speech that is likely to cause physical harm. So this includes saying with goal of causing panic. So if you scream fire in a crowded movie theater, or you walk into an airport and scream, oh my God, they've got a bomb, what's going to happen? Everyone's going to panic. And once everyone starts panicking, what happens? Chaos happens. They try to shut it down. And where's everyone going?
They don't know.
They don't know. They're just running around in circles. And if you put thousands of people together and run around in circles, what ends up happening? Very quickly, if there's a lot of people. Yeah, people get hurt. People get stomped to death. So if you yell, oh my God, they have a gun with the purpose of causing chaos, that is deemed harm speech. You are doing speech that directly leads to physical harm. There are other types of speech that are deemed illegal because they fall under harm speech. Anyone know? So actually, we're going to put hate speech here because this is basically what we're going to be talking about for most of class, is what to do about hate speech. Because the line between hate speech and harm speech is very blurry. But different nations have decided different things about hate speech versus harm speech. And we're now in a time where, because of the things we'll be talking about later, where people think you should draw the line between hate speech and harm speech has shifted, and different states, we're kind of in this interesting time in which what we should do about hate speech is changing. Our views on it as a society are changing, and different states are giving different answers, and we're kind of in this legal gray area where we're not really sure what's going to happen. And as states try to pass hate speech laws, almost certainly the Supreme Court's going to step in and say, no, you can't do that. It violates the First Amendment. So we'll see a bit more with hate speech, but there are some clear cases. So harm speech, just yelling fire to cause chaos, isn't the only way speech can be used to cause harm. Yeah, threats. So explicit threats of I'm going to kill you, and you mean it, and you can prove that it wasn't a joke. If I say these are the things I'm going to do for you, be scared when you get home at night, that is illegal. It is threatening, or there's a term, menacing. I think it's like menacing someone or something along those lines. Another version is an explicit call to violence. So in the United States, you can say people of blank race are subhuman and deserve to die. That is legal in the United States. You are not allowed to follow that up with everyone grab your guns and knives. Let's go to this neighborhood and start killing blank people. As soon as you call to arms or call to violence, it becomes illegal in the United States. So harm speech includes those things. A final one, So unless you're within like a government organization in which you are given the job to make weapons, you cannot pass around the instructions on how to make weapons. Like if you took the instructions on how to make dynamite, printed them out and started handing them around in a middle school, you could get arrested for that because you're supplying information to children that is likely to lead to violence. If you work for the US government and you're handing around instructions on how to build bombs to other members of your team, that's allowed, but you're not allowed to tell children how to make bombs. That is deemed likely to cause harm and violence. So no giving bomb instructions to children, no telling your neighbors to pick up their pitchforks and kill witches, no telling someone directly, I'm going to murder you, and no saying things that are likely to cause panic and lead to harm. Outside of those things, oh, also another thing that gets thrown in there is libel. So libel is making up stuff with the sole goal of harming someone's reputation. So if you make up something and you know it's false and you are a politician who starts spreading rumors and getting it printed, that you can be sued for. But you have to explicitly know, and it's hard to actually prove libel cases because it has to be shown that you are knowingly making stuff up. So if you just pass on a rumor that you thought was true but wasn't, like this is why the person who people going around claiming that Hillary Clinton was running a child prostitution ring out of the basement of a pizza parlor, a lot of the people who spread that story actually believed it was true, so they couldn't get in trouble for libel. They could, however, get in trouble when they brought AR-15s and broke into the pizza shop. Great times. All right, everyone on board with what harm speech is and that sort of thing. Now, there was a question I forgot to bring up in our freedom of speech bit. Why does a society or a country want freedom of speech? We can see why it wants to put the limitations, but why have any freedom of speech? Why not just have it so that you are limited in what you can say as a country or within a certain country? What is the purpose of having these laws? In the United States, what is the major law that we have that protects freedom of speech and freedom of religion and everything else? Anyone know? The First Amendment of the United States Constitution. It is the one that says blah, 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 freedom of speech. It's written a lot fancier, but that's the basic gist of it. So why is it that a country or society has freedom of speech protected by law? Why does the US have the First Amendment? What's the point of it? Yeah, so prevent dictatorship. Why is it that freedom of speech allows a society to prevent dictatorship? What is it that allows? Yeah, it allows, if somebody is doing something that the majority of the population doesn't like, people can gather and organize without having to worry about being punished by that person in charge. So you can imagine how, if you didn't have freedom of speech, the moment somebody starts opposing a president or leader, if they could just arrest everyone who disagrees with them, it becomes very hard to oppose them. So prevent dictatorship and preserve democratic government. And that's another thing. For a democracy to function well, you need people to be able to talk to each other and disagree and come to conclusions. So without freedom of speech, it's very difficult for democracy to function. If the only party in the democracy, if there was one group in power and they were doing things that people didn't like, but the moment anyone disagreed or spoke out, those people were arrested, very quickly the democracy turns into a dictatorship. Why is the other reason, other than just preventing dictatorships, from preventing too strong of a government? There's a second reason, and it more has to do with this freedom of expression bit. So what's the second reason that we like freedom of speech in a nation? Think about your own life. Do you like being able to say what you want to say?
Yeah.
Without having to worry about whether you're going to get arrested for it? Imagine being able to, how much more stress would you have going on the internet if whatever you said, or texting your friends, if you thought there was a chance that somebody was reading it and might arrest you for saying things? So there's a sense in which we like to be able to express ourselves and have power and control over our own lives. So there's also just having a freedom of speech allows for self-expression. So it's not just that it prevents dictatorship and preserves a democratic government. There's also on an individual level, people like to have self-expression. We as a species just generally like that. And so we don't want to lose out on that possibility just because there's a government that doesn't like what you're doing. And it would be very difficult to have things like art in a society that doesn't allow freedom of expression. Because if you did a certain painting, and in that painting, there was somebody who by dumb luck just so happened to look like a leading political figure, and they didn't like it, then all of a sudden, there's going to be a case in which you could get in trouble for it. So very often, this ends up happening in countries that have stronger censorship, where some cartoon will be deemed illegal because it is being used as a stand-in for the leader and a way of insulting them. And next thing you know, Winnie the Pooh is not allowed to be passed around as a photo. All right. Any questions on the why? Any questions on the... All right. So let's go back over here. Now, assuming the line is here, where harm speech is illegal, what is one thing that is not illegal in the United States based on our understanding with the First Amendment? Well, I'll give you a clue. It's written on the board. What is something that is not illegal? Hate speech. Yeah. What is hate speech? What is the definition of hate speech? Anyone know? And you can start off by just giving examples of it, because I think we all know what the examples are. Michael?
Basically, like expressing like you dislike or disagree with someone or something.
Okay, so here's the key thing. It's dislike someone, but not every instance in which you express dislike of someone counts as hate speech. Xavier? So it's not always leading to encouragement of violence. It very often does, as a matter of fact. An explicit call to arms of like, let us attack somebody of this group moves into the harm speech. But very often hate speech leads to harm speech. But there's a clear difference between every case of disliking someone and it being harm speech. So imagine your upstairs neighbor is very self-centered. They play very, very loud music every night. You've talked to them about it, and every time they say they'll change it and they don't. And then you therefore call up the landlord and you say, landlord, the upstairs neighbor is being very disruptive. They are a self-centered person who plays music at all times. I hate them and they deserve to get evicted. Is that hate speech? It is not hate speech. Why does it not count as hate speech? Think about a classic case of hate speech. So anti-Asian hate that happened during the pandemic. What was the difference between that and this case of you being mad at your neighbor, Xavier? That's the key. Hate speech is a case in which you are grouping an entire group of people together and saying hateful things about a member of the group simply because they're a member of the group. Now, if you said, the person who lives upstairs of me is a person of color and therefore they deserve to be evicted, that would be hate speech. Or this person is not, they are subhuman because they are from this nation and everyone from that nation is subhuman and you should evict them. That would be hate speech. Or you fill in the blank with whatever racial slur you want to put in, that is hate speech. But if I say you are a big meanie poo because you always are rude to me, and it's got nothing to do with anything other than your individual personality and the fact you're an asshole, that is not hate speech. It's only hate speech if I say you are a person of this race or this religion or this gender or this sexuality, and because of that, you are subhuman or an asshole or something like that. Michael, and then Yoko. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if it's an obvious answer. Hitler,
yes. Yes, so that, and this is what we're going to talk about a bit more, is where do you draw the line between hate speech and harm speech? Because in the United States, you can go to jail for this one. You can't go to jail for this one. And yet drawing the line between them is very unclear. And all the things that Hitler said about Jewish people during the Holocaust and that led to the Holocaust, that was hate speech. And then as soon as he said, round them up and send them to concentration camps, then it became harm speech. But you can see how one can lead into the other. Yelga.
No, I was just saying, I think I was trying to say, so they both target someone, but it's the way you target it.
Yeah, so this one is leading directly to causing someone physical harm because they're the member of a group. So very often when you have harm speech, it is going to involve a racial or religious or sexuality or gender-based component. But hate speech alone is just saying people of this race are bad or people of this gender are bad simply because they are people like this. So if you say trans people aren't real people because they're confused about who they are, that would be hate speech. If you then add on, trans people deserve to die, grab your pitchforks, let's go stab them, that becomes harm speech. The tough thing is, where do you draw the line between? And sometimes it can be dislike someone. The line between it being disliking someone and being hate speech can be somewhat blurry. So if, for instance, your neighbor, and these are actual cases that have happened, if the neighbor upstairs is a person of color and they listen to a certain type of music loudly, well, if you then say to the landlord, if someone says to the landlord, this person plays too loud music, and part of the reason why the music is disliked is because it is music that is associated with their culture and not your culture, then telling the person they deserve to be kicked out can begin to be kind of hate speechy. And other times, though, sometimes they're just an annoying neighbor who happens to be a member of some race, but they might feel that it's a hateful act when really you are intending it as just, you're annoying because you play music at weird hours, and any music you played at those hours would be unacceptable to me. And so it gets a little blurry between those. So there's the blurry line between disliking someone and hate. There's a blurry line between hate and harm. And just another thing is you can have some of these things without it being tied into hate speech. Like if I just say, I don't like my upstairs neighbor, I'm going to come upstairs and kill you because you play music too loud, and in no way racially related, I would still count as doing harm speech. So you can have harm speech without hate speech, but they very often do go together. Yeah. So this is a tough thing. So where does discrimination fit? It depends on so discrimination, a very big picture term, and it depends on the type of discrimination. So if you, for instance, just use words that are hateful, it might be deemed discriminatory. Like if I were to, if in this classroom, I called everyone who looked a certain way my friend and everyone who looked a different way my arch enemy, then, and I literally called that to people's faces, there'd be some sense in which it was discrimination, but it's unclear whether it's going to be illegal, because the way the government defines discrimination is the actions have to actually have negative impact because of the race or group you're in. So when the actions are discriminatory, it is definitely considered illegal. So a case of this is if a landlord gets two candidates for a house, and one of them has a great credit score, the other one has a terrible credit score, and they go with the terrible credit score because that person's white, that counts as discrimination in a way that is deemed illegal. Now, if the person were to go with this person, but just call them mean names, it in some sense is discriminatory, but it's not deemed illegal. It depends on whether you're doing things. Or if it turned out that I gave all the people who looked one way a certain grade and everyone who looked a different way a different grade, then it's again treating people differently on the basis of race. You can't treat people differently, but you can say different things to them. And just again, the line between saying things and doing gets a little bit blurry. A great question, Michael.
I was going to say, like, this like, I'm going to sound like it's only like illegal.
Yeah. So here's the thing: the government draws, or at least the way in the United States, we draw a strong line between like basically words and deeds. So you're allowed to say things, as long as those things are not directly leading to actions that cause harm. But of course, the line between words and actions are clear. Like threats alone shows that it's kind of a blurry line, because in one sense, threats are just words. But on the other hand, they carry with them such a strong implication of violence that they move to the next level and get deemed actions. While just calling someone a slur is deemed not quite reaching the action level. Any more questions on like this way of carving it up and how it works? And just to give you like where the lines are, there are a lot of countries in the world where, so like I'm gonna put Germany and France here. In Germany and France, you are not allowed to engage in certain types of hate speech. And if you do, you can be arrested for it. So it is you have less freedom of speech because those sorts of things are deemed illegal. So anyone have a guess of what, based on its history, you're not allowed to say or do in Germany publicly?
Oh.
In Germany, there are certain things you're not allowed to say or do.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, there are strict rules around anything Nazi related. If you walk down the streets, if you were to walk down New York City with a big Third Reich swastika flag, you would maybe get punched. You would have a lot of people looking at you, and you would lose all of your friends. But you would not be thrown in jail. In Germany, because of the differences in history, you could be thrown in jail for that. Another example of it is on Twitter. If you type something that is pro-Nazi on Twitter in the United States, Twitter's allowed to leave it up. If you do it on German Twitter, Twitter has 15 minutes to take it down, or else they will be fined. So there are differences in different nations. France, I know, has a big issue around, it's more in the freedom of expression and freedom of religion case. So does anyone know in France what causes some consternation and basically things that are deemed illegal in certain areas in France, which leads to conflicts with certain religious groups? Anyone know?
Wasn't there an issue with the headscarf?
Exactly, with hijabs. There are, in France, there are strict rules around where you can and cannot wear Muslim headscarves. And in the United States, if you're like, what's her name from, where's she from? Minnesota? The member of the House who wears a hijab in Congress. That is allowed. If she was in France, she would be forced to take it off, serve as government employee. So you have less freedom of expression there. And they deem that because France has a different history than us and has judged, well, they spent a long time in like the 16 to 1700s killing each other over interpretations of religion. So therefore, they're much more careful to force people to not do things. But of course, if you are somebody who that's a major part of your culture, then that is going to lead to a lot of upset with the government, and it has led to a lot of issues. And so France is always having these disagreements in politics around what to do around headscarves. Or I know burkinis were outlawed at certain beaches. Are people familiar with what burkinis are? They're a line of swimwear designed for Muslim women that are like designed to be full covering. And the French government decided there was something wrong with burkinis. All right, so enough on that. France, Germany, United States. Now, in the United States, we do not outlaw this. But the question is, should we? We do not right now outlaw hate speech in the sense of I run around and use racial slurs on the internet. I cannot go to jail. But should I be sent to jail for using racial slurs or for saying people of this race are subhuman or anything like that? So here's what I want to spend the next bunch of class doing. Sorry. I just shook my brain out of my ears. Let's see. Oh, yes. Should hate speech be made illegal? Or at least, should we make a hate speech law? There are two possible answers to this. What are two possible answers?
Yes.
Yes and no. There we go. Yes. No. What I want to do now is, so if this is a topic that interests you, just flagging, this is going to be one of the options for the paper. Is going to be, imagine somebody starts a neo-Nazi website with a, like, basically selling neo-Nazi merchandise and has a place for neo-Nazis to get together and talk about white supremacism, white supremacy, white supremacyism. Should that be allowed? And we know today that somebody would be allowed to do that in the United States, but should they? And what I want to talk about now is what the reasons are that people say, yes, there should be this law, what the reasons are that people say no, and whether these answers should change today compared to, like, when we started this nation, or more accurately, a bunch of old white guys started this nation in 1790, whatever it was, when they finally signed the Constitution. Do people have thoughts, just like off the bat, of what are some reasons why we would need a hate speech law, even though we haven't had it in the past? Or what is a reason that we should keep doing things the way we do them today? I think there's good arguments on both sides, which is why I want to open this up and make it a paper topic. Yeah. Yeah, fire away.
So, like, like,
Yeah.
because, like, in some universities, like, some professors have, like, chosen not to apply the pronouns thing. And I don't know if you consider that like hate speech to not do that. So if you were, so like, if you were to consider that hate speech, and then that'd be like illegal, so I'm kind of leaning towards.
So here's one question that I think, so I'm gonna take, because this is a great observation of one of the issues that comes up, and it's a really good example of just where do you draw the line? Seems no good place. So is refusing to use they pronouns, or refusing to call someone by the pronoun they want to use, is that hate speech? Karen? So yeah, there's going to be people who say, no, that's not hate speech. But if you're somebody who tells your professor, like, hey, this is an issue that really means a lot to me, I'd really like it if you were to use the pronouns I prefer, please do this. And the professor's just like, no, I don't believe in that. And in fact, I think that you are, like, just wrong about who you are. And in fact, I think the entire trans movement is founded on a complete misunderstanding of what gender is. It begins to feel like maybe it might be hate speech. And if you start saying, you don't, as soon as you say, you don't spend enough time studying for this class, that's why your grades are bad, because you spend too much time worrying about your pronouns, then it begins to move more and more into the lie. And I think that a lot of people, if I just happen to forget repeatedly which pronouns to use for somebody, that doesn't seem like hate speech. But if I'm doing it to make a point and show that I think your way of thinking about your own identity is wrong, then I think it can begin to move into the hate speech sort of direction. So this is one worry that we have. Part of the reason that people have brought up a hate speech law is this point that Yelka made, and I can't remember who else made it, but this idea that hate speech and harm speech go very closely hand in hand. And people say, well, you can't draw the line between hate speech and harm speech, so therefore we should make them both illegal to reduce violence. But on the flip side, someone's just going to come along and say, well, that doesn't actually solve the problem, because you still have to draw this line between hate speech and not hate speech, and that's no clearer. So that's one reason to say, no, we don't need a law, because it's not going to actually solve anything. On the flip side, we've kind of already addressed this. We have hate speech leads to harm. This is one of the main reasons that people give for thinking that hate speech should be made illegal. It should be made illegal because when people say hateful things, it doesn't stop at just saying hateful things. It leads more and more often to harm. It leads to people going into a mosque or a synagogue or a church with a gun and shooting people. And so the response that someone on this side is going to say to this is, no, it doesn't. Words are just words. But what is there that is, what I really want to do is dive in for thinking that the hate speech leading to actual physical harm or leading to something we should consider harm. This right here is more true than it was, and that's the reason that we might want a law that we didn't have before. I don't remember what I just said for the past 30 seconds. Did it make sense? All right, so why should we think that hate speech leads to harm? And it doesn't just stop with mean words. And especially, why should we think that this is more true today than it was 100 years ago? There. And so why has this become more common? What is it that's allowed people to rally and meet up more so than ever before? Internet, yeah. So hate speech leading to harm speech is more likely, and what I want to argue about right now is how if there's a good reason to make a hate speech law, the existence of the internet is the main catalyst or the main driver that makes that the case. So in what ways, as the existence of the internet made hate speech more likely to lead to harm? Well, organizing. It is now much easier to organize with people who share your views. So hate speech is no longer just individuals yelling hateful things. It can, as soon as you say that on Twitter, other people will begin to organize around you. So that's one big issue and something, oh, I think they're done. You can push out all the way now. It's being loud. Which I shouldn't complain about because I'm the loudest person in this building. So organizing is one. What else has the internet changed about hate speech that has made it more dangerous than it used to be? Okay.
I would say that there's too many things on there that are not like factual, and then it kind of leads down to unreal. I'm not sure how to say that.
So misinformation can spread more. So here's a major issue is just because information spreads more, hate speech very often carries with it false things about members of groups. And it used to be the case that these wouldn't get as far or spread as wide. And there's been a major change with the nature of misinformation. So before, I'm going to come back to this one because it makes more sense to discuss that point after we talk about a couple of the other big picture things, because this is really a symptom of several of the others that is really worth highlighting. Yeah, so here's another thing. It's not limited in the sense of like it's harder to police and say things, but there's another sense in which the internet is not limited. Let's imagine it's the year 200 AD. So back, it's the late Roman Empire. We're living in Italy. And I'm yelling anti-Semitic things. Who is going to hear me say these anti-Semitic things in the year 200? Not many. What is going to determine how many people can hear me? Who's around me and how loud my voice is. Nowadays, I type something anti-Semitic. Who can see it and who can hear it and who can read it? Everyone where? Worldwide, because of the internet. So just the amount that it spreads, hate goes farther. Hate goes a lot farther than ever before. So it's not just that like one hateful thing is bad, but now because it spreads farther, anyone who wants to access hateful speech can get it from around the world at any given time. Also, because people can hear it from farther away, what else does that mean on the audience's end? If you are somebody who has a certain, if you go about your everyday life just walking down the street, the number of times you hear someone use the N-word is limited by how much time you have in your day. If you have Google, you could spend the rest of your life just reading different uses of the N-word because there are so many people using it on the internet. So it's not just that it goes farther, you can and hear more people saying it. So it's not just that each individual can reach a bigger audience, it's that because more people can reach a bigger audience, every audience member hears it from more directions. And that itself is something that can cause some issues. Now, trying to think, what are some other ways in which the internet has changed the damage that can be caused by hate speech? See if I can, does anyone have anything before I try to draw out a different particular answer? All right, how many of you have sent a text? You meant it as a joke, and your friend didn't take it as a joke. Anyone ever had this experience? Or an email in which you tried to email someone something, and the next thing you know, they're mad at you because you didn't realize how they'd interpret it. Yeah. Why is it that right now, if I say a joke, like if I were to say, ha ha ha, I'm gonna kill you, we all know I'm joking because it's in the classroom and it's, but if like I were to just randomly send one of you an email that just said, I'm going to kill you, like that would be a very different experience. What's the key difference? Yeah, it's much, you get a lot less context in an online setting. So here's another issue. There's more hateful speech out there. There's more of an audience, and there's much more chance for misinterpretation. And I think this right here is one of the key ideas. Usually, right now, if I say, in this context of class, let's grab our pitchforks and go down the hall and stab all the people in the next classroom, I think most of you are going to realize that I'm just a weirdo when I say that. But if I type that on the internet and some stranger is reading it and it gets passed around 4chan, the next thing you know, people think that's a very serious argument. So here's a very clear case of this, and this didn't even require the internet. January 6th. What happened on January 6th? Yeah, the insurrection and the charging of the Capitol. According to Donald Trump, when he got up there on the podium and said, rally and support me, did he think of himself as making a call to violence, at least according to him? No, he says it was not a call to violence. But the people in the audience who heard that thought what? It was a call to violence. So the debate that the January 6th committee is engaged in is, was Trump calling people to violence or was he not calling people to violence? And in that case, we had the context of his voice and everything else. If you read it on the internet, it's even blurrier. So one of the major issues that we have with hate speech is that hate speech leading into harm speech is much less clear than it used to be. Now, saying people like this deserve to die can begin to sound like a call to arms if you don't know the context in which someone is saying it. So I think because internet and digital communication takes away so much of the context, the line between hate and harm is even blurrier than ever before and can more likely lead to violence. Now, I want to go back to this misinformation point and talk about really the mechanisms behind this, because there's a couple different things that I think make misinformation tied to hate speech spread more, that leads to bigger problems that we didn't have to worry about before. Give me a second to remember why I'm here and what day of the week it is and sip some water. All right. Why is it easier for misinformation to spread? And why is the spread of misinformation more of a problem than ever before? Let's see if I can find a board. All right, first part, why is it spread more easily on camera?
So many more outlets.
Yeah, there's so many more outlets. So one, this is just the volume issue of things spread more quickly and farther across more connections. So yeah, with the internet, you can just reach more people and have more connections. But that's not the only reason that information spreads more quickly. Or misinformation spreads more easily. What other reasons are there? All right, so here's something. If I were to tell you something like that seemed really quite unlikely, if I told you that, you know, back last year, the population of New York in a single year grew by 1 million people. Seems rather unlikely, but you're believing me because I'm a trustworthy source. But that's only because you have, that's not true, by the way, I just made that up. But if I tell you things, you generally believe me because you know me and you know I'm a rather trustworthy source on most things. By contrast, on the internet, you don't know who the source is in a lot of cases. And so if you read something on the internet, the likelihood of it being true is lower because the sources you're encountering are generally, on average, not people who you're certain of to the same degree. And here's the other thing. If I tell you something person to person, are you likely to tell it to a friend if it doesn't seem completely ridiculous?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're somewhat likely, even if it seems somewhat ridiculous, because you know me and you trust me to some degree. But on the internet, it seems like the bar for sharing and retweeting things is even lower. Now, what I mean by that is if you read some ridiculous story about how dolphins have developed lasers on their little flippers and shoot sharks, why might you retweet that? There's a couple different reasons. Yeah, because it's funny. But somebody else might not know you're retweeting it because it's funny. They might think you're passing on real information. And what can end up happening is basically bar for sharing is lower than in person. Generally speaking, unless we're trying to trick someone, we don't repeat things unless we're pretty damn sure they're true in face-to-face communication. Because if I give you false information a lot of the time, what are you going to stop doing? Believing me. You're just going to stop talking to me. But on the internet, it's not like that. If I retweet bullshit over and over and over again, it's not necessarily going to lead to anyone not paying attention to me. Why not? There's a couple reasons. Yeah. Yeah, so one thing is, well, I lost my train of thought. If I'm bullshitting you face to face, you're going to stop listening to me. Yeah, you'll call me out. Why don't we get called out in the same way on the internet? Or if we do, why does it not have an effect on me actually changing my behavior? Yelka, you had a hand.
Now, I was gonna say, isn't it just easier to just read it and just respond, but not really call you out?
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not gonna fight you on it.
Because we get hit, there's a few reasons. One, we get hit by so much information on the internet. Nobody's following up to check whether the thing you said 2 days ago was false. Like if I share a story, by the time it comes out that it was wrong, no one's paying attention anymore. And the other thing is, well, Michael, you had a hand. The other thing is that on the internet, you don't really know who I am. Like you just know that it's like Surfer Girl 420. If you're Surfer Girl 420, you're less likely to give a damn when people judge you. So you're more likely to say false things. But there's this weird thing where if you read it on the internet, you think it's true. But if you say it on the internet, you don't necessarily think you're endorsing it, which leads to this weird divide in which information gets spread but the bar for making sure it's true is lower. So false information gets spread. And here's the final bit of why does it spread more easily? All right. And algorithmic filtering and confirmation bias. A little psychology meets a little internet design. So what is confirmation bias? Has anyone ever heard this phrase from psychology? Anyone want to try to give it a definition?
It's like, take the source that agrees with you.
Yeah, basically, if something agrees with your already existing preconceptions, you check it a lot less closely than if it disagrees with you. So if you think for some reason that the Knicks are going to win the championship this year, and you come across a story about why the Knicks are going to win the championship this year, you're not going to read it very carefully. You're just going to absorb that information because you already agree with it. If somebody writes something else about why the Celtics are going to win the championship, because you disagree with it, you're going to look over it very, very closely and try to find all the mistakes in it. So generally speaking, if we come across something that agrees with us, we're more likely to believe it and actually strengthen our existing preconceptions and not read it as carefully. So that's what confirmation bias is. Now, this interacts with a second thing called algorithmic filtering. Anyone heard? It's a fancy way of, it's a fancy term, but anyone know what this is talking about?
So basically, like, I have it on Twitter, it happened to me too, and I noticed it.
Yeah,
Like,
so
one time, like, I had two separate accounts, I have my personal account and my sports account, so like, if I would like a tweet of like, let's say a shoe on my sports account, if I go off of it, goes out of it, please go back and you see like more shoe things coming up rather than sports. Or same thing with like sports week, so let's say something about the Knicks. Even though, like, if I have a Nets page and if I like something about the Knicks, I'm gonna see a shit ton of Knicks stuff
yeah,
until it flips back around.
yeah. So here's the basic idea: is what algorithmic filtering is it's the system that websites use to direct which content you see. So an algorithm is just like a computer equation that, based on data, decides what to feed to you. So, and algorithmic filtering is it filters out certain information and gives you other information on the basis of what your past behavior is. And so why is this such a problem? This is actually something we'll talk about a little bit more next time. Well, what is the number one thing that a website wants you to do? Stay on it. The website wants you to stay on the website. Why do they want you to stay on that website? What are they able to get when you stay on it? Like money. And how do they get money? They show you more ads. The more time you're on a website, the more time that advertisers can get to you. So the number one way they want to make money is convince you to stay there. And how are they going to convince you to stay there? What sorts of things are they going to try to show you? Things that you like and things that you already agree with or are likely to agree with. So you have a Facebook account. On this Facebook account, you talk about three things: Trump, guns, and football. What sorts of things are likely to show up for advertisements for you if all they know about you are you love Trump, guns, and football? All three of them. And now they want you to stay on this page longer. One way to do this is to get you to read an article. What article are they going to give you? A Trump article, and specifically a pro-Trump article or an anti-Trump article? Pro. Why? Because which one are you more likely to read and feel good about? Well, what does confirmation bias say? We're going to like and read and engage with things that we agree with more than things we disagree with. So we are going to end up being given more and more pro-Trump stuff. And on top of this, if you are, so that's a somewhat innocuous case. Why does fake news spread so much? Because one thing that algorithmic filtering has allowed people to do is identify who's likely to fall for certain types of fake news stories. So if someone's a liberal, they're more likely to fall for fake news that aligns with their preconceived notions of what the world is like. And so if you give them fake news that aligns with that, they're more likely to believe it. On the flip side, if somebody has conservative views and you give them fake news that is more in line with those views of theirs, they're going to be more likely to believe it. So another reason that fake news and misinformation spreads is that we only these days, thanks to the algorithms, the people who get the fake news are likely to believe it. And if you're not likely to believe it, you're never going to get that fake news. You're going to get different fake news that you're likely to believe. So everyone understand how this sort of thing works, how this algorithmic filtering. Now, why is that such a problem? Why is it such a problem for it to spread? What is the issue with all this fake news, misinformation spreading around? Back to the hate speech, harm speech, Cameron. So one is people are gullible, but what's the big problem of people believing fake things? Like, who cares if we all think that Hillary Clinton runs a pedophile ring out of a pizza parlor, that the moon landing was fake, or that the earth is flat? Why is that a problem? So one is people take action about the false beliefs. And people are more likely than ever before to take action. And why is that? This ties in again kind of with algorithmic filtering, but a second thing, which is called group polarization. Anyone know what group polarization is? Is another psychology term. Pole. Where's the North Pole? Up. How far up? Very far up. And not just very far up. How far up? All the way up. A pole is the extreme. So group polarization is the tendency of people in groups to get more extreme views. And so an example of this is if you put, say, you've got 10 people who are white supremacy curious. So they're not full-blown white supremacists, but they're not anti-white supremacists either. They're open to the idea that the white race is dying and being taken over and some other such nonsense. You put them together in a room and get them to talking. What's going to happen over time? Anyone know? What's going to happen is they're all going to get slightly stronger white supremacist views. Why? Because what they will be sharing with each other are views that only give one side of the story, namely the possibly white supremacist side. So you'll have these people who say things like, does it make sense to think the white race is dying? And then they'll talk to another person who's like, yeah, I had a similar thought. I'm not fully convinced, but here were some of the reasons I had for thinking this might be the case. And as they talk to each other more and more and more, what's going to end up happening is they get pushed farther and farther in this one direction, which is made worse by the fact that on the internet, if you are somebody who's in this group and you have been identified by the algorithm as someone who's likely to, if you have been identified by the algorithm as someone who's white supremacy curious, what sorts of information or news stories are they going to give you? Things that you might click on. And if you click on, here's 7 reasons you might think the white race is dying, then once you've clicked on that, you're going to be given more white supremacist websites and more white supremacist news articles. And you're not going to get the other side of the story because the only people you're interacting with are people who feel similarly, and what's being fed to you by the algorithm is people who feel similarly. So it's not just that people are going to necessarily directly cause violence. It's rather that people are more likely to become extreme in their views. And so the fake news is going to be even more likely to lead to violence as more and more people get these extreme views. So for instance, remember the Buffalo shooting that happened? What was that, like 5, 4, 6, 8 months ago? Something. It's been within the past year. Everyone remember that shooting instance? They went on the computer of the shooter, and what did they find? What had this person been doing for the past year? Where had they been spending their time? Well, social media, and specifically what social media platform, or I guess what message board? So I think there was some Discord in there, but there were also, I think, yeah, I think there was evidence they had been spending their time on 4chan and 8chan and all the other chans that get used for like extreme right-wing things. Yeah, so this person had been spending their time on here, and what they found was this person was somebody who originally was like an angry person, and on these websites came to believe that the white race was dying and that there was a conspiracy of people of color to destroy white people, and that the only way to stop it was to fight back and kill people of color. And what you find is they started off with somewhat odd views, and it just went more and more and more extreme as they spent more time on the internet. And the next thing you knew, they were buying multiple assault rifles and driving to Buffalo to shoot black people. And so this sort of polarization and people becoming more extreme is much easier now with the internet. And so back to the original hate speech question, why is it that we might think that hate speech leads to more harm than ever before? Well, because in an internet setting in which people can be gathered together based on the things they say, and those can be used to give them certain pieces of information, you have people being brought together, interacting with other people who use similar speech, and being turned into groups that are more likely to cause harm. So this is one reason to think that the internet itself is something that is worth making us change our laws about. Does all of that got a little lectury because it's hard for me to answer questions when I can't remember what the question was. And so I just kind of ramble along. There's one other change that I think is really worth highlighting for maybe the yes, we should change the law side. It's not just technology that has grown over the past 100 years. What else grows in a society as time goes along? People grow, and what is going on in those people's minds that grows? So ideologies grow, and tied in with those ideologies is just the amount of information or knowledge that a society has. And what is one thing specifically tied in with health that we have a much better understanding of today than we did 100, 150, or 200 years ago when this was written? An entire branch of health that now gets talked about in a way that it didn't get talked about before. The brain and the mind. Mental health is much, much more considered than it used to be. So back when the founding fathers were writing the Constitution, there was no sense in which somebody's like mental well-being was even a considered thing. It was your body, and then like you were either a bad person or a good person, and people could be crazy, but there was no sense of like taking care of the mind. So with hate speech actually causes a certain type of harm. What harm does it directly cause? I mean, Cameron just answered it for me by pounding his chest. It causes mental and physical, mental distress and like stress around that. So hate speech, this line between hate not causing harm, if we now say that the mind is something we have to worry about that can be damaged and hurt, and hate speech can cause that damage and hurt, it looks like another reason we should stop drawing this strong line between hate and harm is that we now understand that hatefulness causes psychological harm, which is real harm. And to make this even like more clear, cyberbullying. What is cyberbullying? People know what it is. Bullying online. Why is cyberbullying so problematic? What is it that it literally has led to cases of?
Suicide?
Yeah, cyberbullying can lead to suicide. So being able to say that this line between just hateful speech and harm is a clear line where no one's getting physically harmed. These days, because you can't escape hateful things on the internet and you go home and people can still access you and say hateful things to you on Twitter, means that the likelihood of hate being sent your way, causing harm, increases as well. So what are the reasons that we need more hate speech laws? And why is it that certain states and certain cities are trying to pass them in the United States when they weren't before? One of the main drivers here is the internet and the way it's polarized people and the way it's led to such high degrees of mental distress that is nearly harmful. And that the things that get said on the internet actually lead to physical violence and things like spitting on people or beating people up simply because they are of East Asian origin. And that's something that seems more likely to occur now thanks to the internet. And so that's really like, if we need a new hate speech law, the internet is a major driving force, as is our new understanding of mental health. But that doesn't get rid of some of the problems of where do you draw the line? There seems no good place to draw the line. What is another reason that people have said that, or you might think that hate speech laws shouldn't exist? Yeah, it's a slippery slope. So because it's hard to draw the line, you say this thing is and this isn't the slippery slope fallacy. This is actually one thing is going to cause another is going to cause another. As soon as you say, and the first case happens of hate speech and it gets prosecuted, the next case is going to get used. And one worry is that all of a sudden you're going to have people saying things are hate speech and trying to get it punished when it's a case like what Cameron was saying at the start of just somebody using the wrong pronouns. Now, all of a sudden, someone's going to be getting charged for what was an honest mistake or something like that. So it's very hard because it's hard to draw the line. It's going to lead to these further problems.
And then also, like, let's say for that example, it happens to another person that you think is that government, then you're gonna have like, what, more than 100,000, maybe more than like 250,000 cases of like that, because of the misunderstanding.
Yeah, and it's going to be very difficult to draw the line here. Where like it's hard enough with violence, but as soon as we have a hate speech law, the number of things that can be called hate speech is much bigger than the number of things that can be called harm speech. And so as soon as we open up, there's going to be a big Pandora's box of all sorts of things getting prosecuted, and it's very hard where to draw the line. And even if it's hard to draw the line over here, there's going to be more instances of things that are hard to draw the line over here, just because there's more cases of things that can be called hate speech than harm speech. All right. Any other reasons to think we do or do not need a hate speech law? Okay.
I was also gonna say that, like, how would the environment
That's another issue is implementation of laws. So in the United States, in New York City, if I were to walk out of this building, see an old lady and punch her in the face, what would happen to me?
Get arrested.
I get arrested. And specifically, who would I get arrested by? The police. And which police? NYPD. That is the key. There's this thing called the jurisdiction that you're in. You are arrested by the people in that jurisdiction. However, imagine we put a hate speech law in place in New York City. How on earth would you police many of the cases? So if I'm on my phone and somebody says, hey, you fill in the blank with racial slur, you're a fucking fill in racial slur, you deserve to die. And I go to the police and I say, hey, I got this hate speech from Surfer Girl 420. Can you please arrest this person? What are they going to say? Well, first off, they're going to say, we don't have the resources to track down who this person is. And then they do find them. And it turns out they live in, I don't know, Florida. They live in a shack in Florida. The NYPD is going to say, well, they are outside of our jurisdiction. Or even worse, what if it turns out it's a Russian bot? Hi, Vlad Putin. Is this Vlad? Yes. Would you kindly tell your bots to stop saying racial slurs to people in my city? Like, Putin's not even going to pick up the call. So there's this major implementation issue where about the only types of hate speech that we could stop are ones in person. And those aren't the ones that are happening online and leading to this sort of extremism.
I feel like that, like, if such thing was to happen, it has to be like a worldwide thing.
Yeah.
Instead of like a country thing. It's a worldwide thing. It's more easier to apply it because you have friends of like that nation and all.
Yeah, and here's the major issue with that, though. If we were to try to get every country in the world on board with this, what would happen very quickly?
Disagreements.
Yeah, disagreements. And somebody's going to come along and just be like, hey, this law was started by the United States and we hate them, so we're not even going to like follow along. It's impossible to get any sort of international agreement on much of anything in the world that we live in, which is a problem because the internet is so global. So this is really a part of a bigger issue, which is we now interact with people worldwide, and yet our laws are still tied to a physical place, which makes any of these sorts of things impossible to implement. And it would begin to seem like the only way you could get this to work would be to have the websites themselves policing it. So you'd have to make it that Twitter is in charge of stopping people from saying things on Twitter.
Like criminal department.
Yeah, You need, and the issue is, if you've ever read any of these sorts of things, it's nearly impossible because of the amount of information that gets posted. Like
Seconds.
every second, Instagram would have it to be doing all of these things. And the problem is, with something like Instagram, the only way that you'd be able to implement this correctly is if you use AI to do it. You need some sort of algorithm that's searched. The problem is our algorithms aren't nearly good enough yet to do this. So there have been cases of, well, basically, because our facial recognition and our AIs are all racist and sexist, it's leading to all sorts of issues. And also, here's the other thing is like, there's a lot of context around things that humans are able to pick up on, but a computer AI cannot. So Facebook tried to put up something that was identifying like pornographic images and picking them out and just like taking them down immediately. And one of the problems was it was taking down things that people started thinking like that shouldn't be taken down. So one was there was this photograph from the Vietnam War that was deemed like the photograph of the year. And it was this little child who was like 4 years old who happened to be naked because they had just fled their house from like a napalm bombing. So they're in the background is like their village on fire. And you see this child running, and it's like this incredible image of the the problems of war. And Facebook was like, nope, that's child porn, get rid of it. And it's because it's naked child. So it's very hard to get the context. And so when you've got an AI not being where it is yet, it's not yet able to identify actual cases of things that would be hate speech versus harm speech. And another issue, and this is something that's come up with ChatGPT, is that to avoid, so this was an actual case where the AIs are being run in such a way to try to avoid them saying harmful or offensive things, but they've trained them to go a bit too far. So they asked ChatGPT, what will the religion of the first Jewish president be? And ChatGPT's response was, we cannot know what the religion of the first Jewish president will be. They should be chosen on their merits and abilities, because it was so overcorrecting that it didn't want to make any mention of religion or anything that might be anti-Semitic. So because of this, just the word Jewish was completely excised from its vocabulary. And so there's another worry of if we're training this thing, just like, it's not just going to get rid of hate speech, it's going to get rid of any speech about any religious group or any racial group or any gender group. And then there'll just be no discussion of those things online at all, which will end up doing more harm than good, I think, in a lot of ways. Okay.
Going back to the slippery slope, that kind of ties into that. Wasn't there a pushback from like a lot of academic professors when somebody who giving an opinion about hate speech, they were getting kicked off of campus, and they're like saying, well, this is censorship, and that's where does that lead to?
Absolutely. And that's another issue, is the line between stopping genuine hate speech and censoring people with differing opinions than you is very unclear. And so like one thing this is an actual thing that's happening in academic philosophy right now, is there has been a huge literature on the nature of gender and on what it is to be a woman in light of all the discussions around transgenderism. And one thing that's happened is that there have been people who have argued positions that were not, basically, a woman is an adult human female. And people who are members of the trans community said that person's views are not enlightened. They don't understand the actual literature, and the person's article got pulled from the journal. And this person responded with, you aren't pulling me for having done bad research. You're pulling me because I disagree with the orthodox view. You are censoring me. And so it's very hard to draw the line between just disagreeing views that are done well and actual things that are hate speech. And so it really does lead to this slippery slope issue like Peng was talking about. And as soon as we put a hate speech law in place, the number of those cases that are going to have to be dealt with is just going to skyrocket. Any other questions, comments, concerns on this point? A pretty good job. We do not have enough time to talk about privacy, regardless of whether my head was working right now, and my head is not working. So here's what we're gonna do. I'm going to stop the recording and oh, damn it, I have to figure out how to do this.